Welcome back to another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about how a small one-line fix in ZFS can have big improvements. We'll give you an update on some of the MinIO alternatives and a bit of the fallout from that. We are going to have some AI discussion, not with an AI, but about AI, and answer a couple more audience questions, including information about VMware Snapshots. With that, let's get right into it, Chris. We have a quick sneak peek here about what we're thinking about the future of virtualization in TrueNAS. You want to dig into this a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll just briefly mention it. So we'll be announcing something we're thinking next week, but we've been listening to a lot of the feedback from folks on the Fangtooth release, especially about the experimental status of instances in VMs, and we're looking to rapidly address this. So in particular around the VMs functionality, because that was probably the most painful thing for people coming from Fangtooth and having that move to an experimental status. So we're taking a look at that. Some news here soon, so stay tuned. We'll talk about that here in the next episode, I think, in a lot more detail. But all that to say, again, we appreciate the feedback. We hear it, and we're happy to address that here in the near future.
That sounds good. I mean, I am enjoying the instances, certainly, but the VMs have posed some unique challenges, and I definitely would say that I've heard a lot of feedback on that, especially on our community forums. So we are listening to you folks. We do appreciate it.
And you could say not every company does that. So again, I think that's one of the things that's a little unique here is that we can listen to an open source community and take rapid feedback and hopefully course correct where necessary. So anyway, looking forward to some more conversation on that here in the near future.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this one-line fix that we've got in ZFS. What sort of drove this one forward? I took a look at the pull request, and I will put it down in the comment section for everybody watching us on YouTube. But let's talk about this, speed improvements with just one little change.
Yeah, one of our developers had an epiphany. I was like, oh, I wonder if that's an issue. And sure enough, it was. So I'm going to read the actual commit in its entirety because it explains it better in his own words than mine would. But then we'll get into it. So the start of the pull request, the description is that the ZIL introduced dependencies between its write ZIOs to permit flush to firm. When we flush VDEV caches only once, all the write ZILs have been completed. But it was recently spotted that it serializes not only the ZIO completion handling, but also their ready stage, which means the pipeline can't calculate checksums for the following ZIOs until all the previous are checksum, even though it's not necessarily required. On a system where memory throughput of a single CPU core is limited, it creates a single core CPU bottleneck, which is difficult to see due to the ZIO pipeline's design with many task queue threads. While it would be great to bypass the ready stage waits, it would require changes to the ZIO code, but I haven't found a clean way to do it. But I noticed we don't need any dependency between the write ZIOs if the previous ones has some waiters, which means we don't defer any flushes and work as a barrier for the earlier ones. Bypassing it won't help large single thread writes, since all the write ZIOs except the last in that case won't have waiters, so it will be dependent. But in that case, the ZIO processing may not be a bottleneck since there's only be one thread populating the write buffers. That will likely be the bottleneck. By bypassing the ZIO dependency on multi-threaded write workloads, really allows them to scale beyond the checksumming throughput of one CPU core. That's a lot of words, and we're getting into the technical details of how ZFS works here. Apologies to those who don't quite follow along. Okay, the interesting side. How's this been tested? My test with writing 12 files on a same data set on a pool of 4 striped NVMEs as SLOGs from 12 threads with 1 megabyte blocks on a system using Xeon's over 4,114 CPUs shows that the total throughput increase goes from 4.3 gigabytes a second to 8.5 gigabytes a second, increasing the slog's busy time from 30% to 70%. Okay, that's massive. Again, small fix, a lot of words to say it got really dang fast, really quick.
Yeah.
because
pretty
there
much
was a bottleneck.
Doubling the throughput by lifting a bottleneck that was found in a single line. And
Absolutely.
That's pretty fantastic. But it is important to note that some of the caveats there about, it won't necessarily make a change for a large single thread write. So those of you going, hey, I happen to have, 100 gigabit Ethernet going on at home. Why isn't this one copy off my Windows machine being helped by it? Well, again, it may not help those large single thread writes nearly as dramatically as it's going to do with the parallelism here. Because you take the dependency off of those multi-threaded workloads, it basically says you can scale wider. So this is a case where if you have a 100 gig connection to your TrueNAS device, say if you happen to go out and have a TrueNAS F series, and you had multiple systems with 10 gig or 25 gig streaming into it, that should hopefully increase the total throughput capacity there. It much like, LACP, it might not necessarily increase it for the independent single link, but you could probably stuff more links into the same system now.
But hey, that's super important because if that's your particular bottleneck and pain point, being able to alleviate that is fantastic. One of the reviewers on the OpenZFS side, Rob, said he saw about a 6% increase in speed using an embedded ZIL with 100% write and F-sync workload. So again, not as dramatic as the original developer's fix here, but still an improvement. So it's one of those things where your results will vary. And again, this is good stuff from one of our TrueNAS engineer royalty here at IX Systems. It's obviously going to need some testing, soak time, but those indications are promising. And Chris, you hinted at it, but we got to always put the caveat out there. The only thing constant in performance testing is the words "it depends." Right? That's what we're always hearing, and that's because with everything performance related, you quash one bottleneck, and then you move on to the next one, which is causing the next performance hit. And not all particular bottlenecks are the same depending on your workload, as Chris was mentioning here. So again, if you're hitting this very particular bottleneck on single core checksumming throughput, great, you can now get more parallelism and hopefully see an improvement overall on your system write performance. And especially in his test case, he's using multiple striped ZILs or SLOGs, excuse me. That's cool. Okay. Yeah, not everyone has that setup though. So again, your results may vary.
Exactly. It's one of those things where you're kind of playing a bit of whack-a-mole sometimes. I always would explore that with people who are saying, sync writes. They would say, I need a faster log device. Okay, my log device is now faster than my network. Okay, my network bottleneck was now removed. Now I'm hitting the problem of my backend pool is too slow, and eventually after I saturate my log device, things slow down. So I need a faster pool. And then they say, well, now my pool's fast enough that my log is a bottleneck. And I said, well, now you're back to step one. So you need a faster log device. Once your log device faster,
Yeah, one of the biggest things at the high end we don't really talk about a lot here, or people don't think about, is RAM speed is super important for good ZFS performance because there's a lot of memory copies happening in the background, right?
This is going to be great because literally just before hopping on to record this, I was making comments in our Discord channel about RAM speed. So I think it's Squaws, if you're watching, hey, you inspired some of this.
Hey, well, good. Well, I was going to say, yeah, RAM speed again is the thing a lot of people overlook. Like RAM's just fast, right? Well, yeah, there's fast, faster, and fastest, right? So again, take that into account because as you're moving blocks around, you're making copies in memory constantly. And so RAM speed and how quickly you can move things out of the CPU back into RAM and all that is super important, especially at the higher end. Okay, you're on a lower end system with 10 gig connection, maybe not as big a deal, but you start playing in with the big boys at 40 gig and 100 gig, it matters.
Exactly.
So pay attention to that.
That's where you start getting into things even as much as like, RAM ranks and density and, the latency of your memory sticks. They can make a difference in those very like high end edge performance cases. So that's where it starts to matter. But always, the fun of, finding those bottlenecks and eliminating them is it's kind of a challenge on its own. You go through the process, you say, okay, I fixed this one, and you make those little stair step improvements every time. And everybody, the best part is we all get to share our knowledge, collaborate, and everybody gets to benefit from the learning experience.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's dig into some more here. Like, let's talk about the MinIO alternatives. So a few weeks back, we covered some of that drama surrounding MinIO's decision to basically yank their whole web-based administrative UI out of the open source side of their product. And they said, hey, we're going to make you use the command line MC client only for your admin. Obviously, that was an upstream decision from MinIO to do so, even if we believe it was done in kind of poor form and poor taste. Since then, we've seen a lot of interest in alternatives, and we've seen some forks of the admin UI, which is called OpenMaxIO. We've seen Garage and Seaweed FS and Versity Gateway pretty much land immediately in the TrueNAS apps catalog as a reply, which is a great alternative for sort of the home lab types. But there's various additional forks of MinIO that have popped up on GitHub. So I guess, Chris, we're expecting that some of these are going to land in our apps catalog in the near future, but
yeah,
we're kind of still observing and see which one of those is really going to be the one that gets that community momentum behind it and should get merged. We've mentioned
As
OpenMaxIO, but really what we're looking for is we need that containerized version, right?
Mhm. Yeah, we need the containerized version, and the thing about OpenMaxIO is they get props for having the best name so far. So I think that's the one everyone gravitates to because the name makes sense and it's good and catchy. But we also haven't seen a lot of traction on it happening, and this is what happens with forks. It takes a little time for the dust to settle and see which ones are going to be viable. Some people fork in anger, and so you'll see it immediately forked and then nothing happens with it and it kind of just withers away and dies pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
we're keeping an eye on it. Obviously things are going to continue to land in the app store as there's need and demand, so keep the requests coming. We've seen, again, there's other forks starting to show up on GitHub for the web UI piece, so it's possible we may not only have one but several down the road as some of these forks go different directions or add different functionalities back, or new functionalities maybe that even the original MinIO UI didn't have. So again, we're paying attention to it. Keep your requests coming. There's a whole long issue commentary thread on the apps repository on GitHub. You're welcome to go take a look at it. That's the one where it's open for OpenMaxIO, and we'll have the link here. You could take a look, click that. We're still keeping an eye on a containerized version of that to show up, and if it does, great. It gets merged. We put it in the app catalog. If it doesn't, then there's alternatives we'll take a look at as well. Not to say that we won't have multiple alternatives eventually also, because that's kind of the cool thing about the app catalog is kind of that freedom of choice. You can pick and choose. There's a lot of things that in the catalog that do more or less the same function, but for various reasons you may prefer one over the other. It's kind of like having Plex and Jellyfin at the same
Exactly.
time, and MB. Yeah, so
It's
it's good.
it's one of those good problems to have in a sense where you go, we have sort of this embarrassment of riches. As long as you don't get caught in the, analysis paralysis stage, you say, we've got all these ones, which one do I pick? And that's kind of part of the reason we've got sort of the install numbers and the user numbers up on our own TrueNAS apps web catalog. It kind of lets you know which one of these is sort of getting that community momentum behind it. And again, with everything being open source, the idea is, if there's a contribution in one that benefits, the rest of them can bring it along, port it over if necessary, and merge it into their own. So, what benefits one of us benefits all of us.
Absolutely. So we'll
Yeah.
keep an eye on that. Again, keep the feedback coming. We appreciate it, and good luck, folks.
All right.
Okay, our next topic here, I wanted to take a moment and talk about something we haven't really addressed on the show much yet, Chris, which is kind of thoughts on AI and some of the churn we're seeing in our own industry, vibe coding, all these terms being thrown around that it seems like are in the news just about every other day. Even my parents are reading about it. So clearly it's touching the mainstream now. But some thoughts, we haven't shared on this yet. My thoughts
Yeah.
specifically here is like the AI development revolution is here. Obviously, AI has been around a few years now. So I'm not talking just general chatbot AIs and all that, but we're now witnessing at this very moment kind of the rise of AI taking the primary driver's seat in a lot of software development practices right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say, it's getting pretty scary good at it. So sure, there's plenty of folks, and I see them on LinkedIn, I see them on different places who want to go and ridicule the AI pushing bad code. Okay, I get it. I mean, sure, yeah, people can go and make AI write bad code. The irony being that somehow these folks don't realize that I can also go to GitHub and point to numerous examples of badly human written code as well. I mean, that's a trend that has been going on forever. There's always
And
garbage code floating around. Have you ever been on GitHub
I was just
and
say
seen?
anybody who's spent any time on Stack Overflow at all knows that
Oh
bad
yeah.
human code is, well and truly out there, and it's scary to think how much of it is probably integrated in the products we're using right now.
Sure. Sure. So, I mean, AI maybe shines a little different spotlight on it because more of it can show up faster. And so there's a lot more of it available. But this whole idea of, somehow human code is a different threshold, I think, come on, that's not real world here. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is, I've been pretty heavily engaged, and we've been, of course, trying to stay current and check on what's going on in our industry. And I've been engaged with this whole vibe coding concept for a while now. And I got to say, it's getting better and better. It's impressing me more and more. And I'm also completely understanding, though, that the quality you get out of the AI depends entirely on the person sitting at the keyboard. So a person sitting at the keyboard who doesn't have strong fundamentals and, say, good software development practices and all the various disciplines that go with that, for example, architecture, how am I doing front end, back end architecture, or performance or security? Hey, AI code generated by somebody who doesn't know those things, I think it's just going to generally look crummier than someone who is well versed in those areas with the same AI tools doing the same kind of code writing. because at the end of the day, it's still a tool. It's garbage in, garbage out. If somebody who doesn't know what to ask or how to ask it, or how to guide the AI to go do good development practices, is it sitting at the keyboard, then you're going to get a worse result. At the end of the day, it's not magic. And I think that's the thing people miss with AI. They set this bar up crazy high and think, well, it needs to be to hit this magical point. I don't think that's the case. While AI does get a lot of things right, it doesn't just magically bridge the gap between taking, say, a bad specification or a bad prompt or bad thoughts or design and then turn it into an amazing code, which is fast, performant, secure, and like intuitive and all that.
Yeah, this is kind of like the uncanny valley of AI code.
Yes.
They always say the first 80% of something is often really easy. It's that last 20% that's going to be the hard part. So
absolutely.
We're kind of approaching that point.
That's exactly what's happening, and that's where you're going to have to spend most of the time polishing. But we should be honest with ourselves, though. The same thing happens all the time with a lot of human written code and projects as well. How many times have you seen companies throw something over the fence where it was clear they contracted that out and it wasn't really paid attention to, and they kind of did a halfway job? A lot of those don't approach perfection either. And as developers, if we're honest with ourselves, we all write code that's just good enough for whatever the job is at hand. We as developers, and I've been there, worn that hat for a long time, we always are leaving things kind of on the table that we wish we could get back to and go do a better job on. We're making notes of, oh, I'm going to go fix that. I'm going to go return to that. You can see it in the comments when you go look, for goodness sake, like to do, I should go fix this someday. And then that's in production for 10 years. So I get it. We've all been there, but it's always limited by the fact we just don't all have the extra time in the world available to us to go and do everything perfect the way we'd like. But the fact is that here right now at this moment, the rise of AI being the primary code generator, it's either upon us depending on where you work, or it's right around the corner. I've seen estimates from different large AI companies saying, and large development houses saying, that anywhere from 20 to 30% of all their code right now they're checking in as AI authored, and I believe it. I've seen estimates saying that by the end of this year it could be in the 50 to 90% range, maybe 6-12 months depending on who you ask. I mean, based on my own experience and just seeing the progress and how fast it is and how much better it's getting, it seems almost weekly. I think that's a real possibility. And even if those estimates are a bit aggressive, it's just a matter of when, not if, at this stage. I mean, we're entering a new world where the bottleneck is going to be shifting in software development from the actual bottleneck of I need hands on a keyboard typing code to now the bottleneck is how the hell do we test, validate, and ensure all this code that's being rapidly generated is production quality in a timely manner, which of course we'll be using AI to help with as well. Design the test frameworks, the test harnesses, the regression suites, all that good stuff. There might be a stage here in the not too distant future where the real pace of change is only limited by us purposely holding things back to avoid shocking the system. As change happens too quickly that users and customers can't adjust. I mean, that's a year ago, 2 years ago, that would have just been a wild thought, but that's something we have to actually think about now and consider, like, oh man, what are we going to do when we have all these features we want to merge in? That's like, I can't put them all in at once. Like, people will go bananas. Like, everything just changed out from under me. So it's going to really change how we think about doing engineering and software engineering in particular. And we're having a lot of interesting conversations in the industry right now about what the new challenges are going to be and how we're going to have to refactor about how we do our kind of day-to-day work in the near future. So all that to say, that's kind of my 2 cents on where we are at this particular moment in time, which happens to be June 13th, 2025, for those who are finding this years later and going to be like, oh, this guy got it all wrong. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening. But I think this is going to be a topic we're going to be addressing a bit more often in the coming months, because again, it is really a revolution in our entire industry, and it's important. And obviously on the TrueNAS side, we're keenly aware of it as well. I mean, we're impacted just like everyone else. So looking forward to seeing more of this in the future, talking about this a little bit more openly with a lot more folks going forward. And it'll be interesting to watch the psychological drama too, because I had my own reactions the first time I sat down and started writing code and letting the AI kind of sit in the driver's seat at my keyboard. And it was like, okay, yeah, there's definitely a creepy, uncanny valley factor at play, at least initially, because it is strange to watch. But
well,
I mean,
it's
let's
only
be
been
honest.
like it's a very, very rapid pace of change. I mean, think about 3 years ago, Chat GPT was not a thing.
Oh yeah,
Pretty sure it was
not a thing.
November in 2022 when they said, hey, here's our first instance of Chat GPT. Try it out. And we all remember how very, very interesting those first generated snippets of
Absolutely,
text
they
and
were.
code were.
You guys remember the first AI generated art and images and how just god awful it was? The first videos, I think Will Smith eating spaghetti compared to like now, and it's like
Now,
wow.
now with Google VO, it's
Actually,
quite a
it
difference.
looks decent, but I mean the stuff we're doing now, and I'm personally doing with AI, agentic coding right now. I mean, even 5 months ago, 4 months ago, I couldn't do this. It's changed that much that quickly, and it's because some of it has to do with the models, a lot of it has to do with the tools and how the tools are able to work better with AI. So it's about building better scaffolding for AI to kind of stay on rails and do the right thing. But anyway, it's interesting. Like I said,
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of change happening here, and I'm personally kind of an optimist and enjoy the change and the new things. I think that's good. But yeah, obviously, it's one of those 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, because we talked about performance bottlenecks. Well, it's the same thing in software engineering. Now we improve 3 things, and now we got 2 other things that become a problem that weren't in the past. Like how do you QA it all? How do you
exactly.
test it all? How do you do reviews? It changes that. So it'll be interesting to watch. I'm looking forward to the challenge in the upcoming year.
Absolutely. Well, hey, that's enough for, I guess, kind of the heavy subjects there, the big topics of conversation. We will come back and touch on those periodically. And again, if you have thoughts on those, drop them in the comments. But for now, let's jump over to a couple of viewer questions we gotten in from the audience here. So we got a question in from Chris. He says, okay, so we got another Chris. So we'll have to make sure we keep
That's
this all
too
clear.
confusing.
Here we go
Yeah,
again.
we're gonna change your name, Chris.
Yeah. It says, love the show. Keep up the good work. The software status page is great. But just like Apple and Microsoft, could you add end of life support dates for your versions? EOL being, in this case, you will no longer receive a security update. Even if they're currently not known, could you try to give us a 6 to 12 month warning, please?
Yeah.
So this is something Apple and Microsoft do. And, maybe that is one of the things we can look at. But what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, maybe down the road. That makes sense. For now, the kind of rule of thumb, Chris, is run a 6 month cadence, which means by around the time the .2 of a next major release comes out is when we have officially stopped supporting the previous. So again, that can be 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that range, if you're kind of paying attention. So when 25.10.2 drops, we'll say January-ish, no, maybe February-ish of next year, that would be the time we'd stop supporting the 2504 branch with security updates. But again, there's a little bit of play there because sometimes there are pressing reasons to say, yeah, we're going to go back and backport that. But it's not a hard and fast rule. We haven't done like official EOL dates and we're not publishing them in advance. Now, all that to say, if there's enough interest in that and maybe more of a long-term supported release that maybe is a paid enterprise thing that we do down the road, sure, like we'll consider that. That's crossed our minds before. It's not off the table, but we just got to see if there's enough interest and kind of, I guess, backing for it. It's not something we're just gonna throw out there and do for free on the community side. I don't see that happening because it's a lot of work to basically have a maintenance release like that and support it for a long time. Again, that's human time, developer time. That stuff just doesn't happen for free. So we haven't done it yet, but doesn't mean we're not open to the idea. And if there's enough interest, leave us notes, send us email, put things in the comments, and we can consider it. We just got to gauge interest before we go and say, yeah, we're going to commit and sign up for it, because it's one of those things you can't really take it away once you put it out there and say this is the LTS and here's the support schedule and the EOL dates. Like, you got to stick to them. I can't just walk away from that halfway through. So
Yeah, I don't think it's the kind of thing that you'd want to say, well, we're going to do an LTS, but we're going to vibe code it with AI. I don't think we're quite
yeah.
at that point. I don't think that's going to
No,
work
no,
out for everybody.
no. Like I said, the LTS is a whole different animal. But again, it's worth considering. So we'll keep an open mind and we'll just gauge interest and see if there's enough folks who want that.
All right. Well, hope that answer satisfies you, Chris.
Okay, next up, we have a question from Aaron. I'll read this and let you get into the answer here, Chris. So he says, greetings. I'm sure this knowledge exists on the forums, the docs, and I could figure it out with a bit more research. Or you could ask our AI bot. It might have helped you too, but he thinks this is a good topic for the show, which I think it is. That's why we're including your question today. Aaron says, I'm using TrueNAS as an iSCSI target for VMware ESXi. I configured VMware integration for snapshots. It seems as though the TrueNAS integration is nothing more than an automated way of doing VMware snapshots. When the scheduled TrueNAS snapshot takes place, VMware kicks on a VMware level snapshot, the way we have This way we have crash consistent snapshots. Sorry if I can read here. The snapshot shows up in the VMware Snapshot Manager. And the way normal VMware snapshots work is the original VMDK file, the virtual hard drive, is frozen and changes to the VM are written out to a Delta file. It's considered best practice not to keep these sort of snaps around very long. The risk of failures increases as the time goes on, as well as an IO hit. Is TrueNAS doing the same thing? If so, is the Delta file being stored on the same data store as the VMDKs? In other words, can one browse out and see all those files, or are they in the reserve space that TrueNAS strongly encourages one to keep? In other words, are we only creating a storage object in the 80% of usable space? I think that's how he's trying to say that. I ran into an issue where TrueNAS scheduled snaps were happening. In addition, Veeam was in play, and Veeam was also utilizing VMware snapping. This created nested snapshots. In other words, there's a VMDK, a TrueNAS snap, and then a Veeam snap. That's a lot of snaps on top of snaps. He said, furthermore, Veeam takes the snapshot and maps it to itself in order to do the backup. Now another TrueNAS snap event occurs, and this time includes a snap now containing the Veeam server. Due to the time required for this particular Veeam backup to run, the data store filled up and VMware halted the VMs. The data store was at 100% full. Because of this, there was no working space available, so deleting snapshots was not an option. In short, a TrueNAS iSCSI volume presented to VMware was 60% full, and due to the combination of the scheduled TrueNAS snapshots with Veeam, we filled up the data store. In order to dig myself out of the hole, I did some storage vMotion to one of the hard drives on a different data store, and I did the snapshots. Any input is appreciated. I'm happy to elaborate if I was less than clear. For the interim, I have disabled the TrueNAS snaps. Thanks in advance, Aaron. Okay, Chris, where did we go wrong here?
Oh boy! All right. Well, let's wind this one back to the. Let's wind this one back. Run it back to the beginning. So the TrueNAS integration says it's not just it's nothing more than an automated way of doing the snaps. It's tying in with VMware. So what's happening is you're taking your VMware snapshot, and in this case you're taking the ones without the memory instance, and it's crash consistent. I think we can. I'm not sure if we can trigger the way to do the VMware Shadow volume manages where it can do an app level consistent one, but that's something we'll explore. And then, of course, we do the TrueNAS ZFS level snapshot so that you're then able to destroy your VMware snapshot, and that crash consistent state is kept on disk in the much more efficient ZFS managed level. So we don't have Delta files in the same sense that you have like your CTKs, your change tracking in the VMware world. It's being tracked on the ZFS world, which is way, way more efficient. And you don't have those layers of nested snapshots in VMware that, as you mentioned, eventually do increase the risk of failure and, drain your IOs because VMware has to do all this logic there. So basically, it sounds like what happens is there's just one data store in place. There's all the production VMs, but there's also the Veeam backup engine on there. And what happened basically is because Veeam was mapping those disks to itself, and it's all happening on the same data store. From TrueNAS's perspective, it doesn't know that you're already doing this, so it just sees here's a disk, and it was just basically stacking snaps on snaps on snaps. It was doing a lot of redundant work. The easiest way to do this, I would say, is create a second data store that Veeam, your Veeam machine lives on. So when you're telling it to do snapshots, you're only protecting your production machines with your short-term TrueNAS snapshots. In addition, if you're also doing Veeam as a level of your backups, you're kind of going to be creating a tiered solution. So your first level of, immediate order backups, whether you're taking them on a daily basis or something, is going to be at the TrueNAS level. Then if you're then copying the snapshots that are also been created over through Veeam, you're then going to be taking, I assume, separate snapshots at the VMware level and then spooling them off to Veeam where you're putting them on separate storage. Maybe the question is that additional storage also on the same TrueNAS system? It sounds like they've kind of created an accidental, a recursion loop here. Yeah. You've created the recursion behavior where you've got a snapshot, and then you've taken a snapshot of that snapshot, and then under here, you're remounting that same one and it's grabbing it again. And then you have sort of the time for the backup. It's, it says the data store filled up. Now, is this just a case of there wasn't enough overhead space and there was too much Delta in there that was being written? Or is it the reality that, there's too long of retention on your snapshots before they're being removed? It sounds like it's something I'll probably have to reach out to Aaron in a follow-up email. But I would think that it's possible that what you could do is say, let's make a second data store, have your Veeam instance running on that separate data store, and don't snap that one, because if you're backing up your backup engine in two different ways, that seems like it's kind of a bit of redundancy. It may not be necessary.
Yeah, and this is a good one. Again, possibly on the forums, people may have opinions as well, and we can help dive into this. But
yeah, this
definitely,
is
seems like you're
absolutely
doing a lot
great
extra complexity here that you don't need.
Yeah, this is definitely a great thread for the forums. We can get, our whiteboards and our diagrams out and really dig into this, start finding all the logs and figure out how this happened. So, Aaron, hopefully you're listening. I'll send you an email, but yeah, make a thread on the forums, throw me that @tag. I'm Honey Badger. You can find me there. And let's dig into this, and we'll find you a good solution, figure out why it happened and how to prevent it from happening in the future.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. I always love those technical ones, and I could tell it was coming when you said, I got a question for you. I went, this is going to be a good one. But that was
and it was wordy too. So I read it in its entirety, but there was a lot of detail there, like I said, just to give you the idea of how much complexity we had going on here.
It was important. So it might take a little bit of time to unwind that one, but we'll find a way to get it sorted. All right. Well, I think that is our show for the week here, Chris. We're just around the 30-minute mark. We will be here as usual next week, hopefully with a bit more detail about the path forward with virtualization and some of the upcoming improvements in new TrueNAS versions. So as always, thanks for tuning in to the TrueNAS Tech Talk podcast. Just as before, feel free to submit your viewer questions in to t3@truenas.com. Please do the usual YouTube things to help the engagement algorithm. Drop us messages in the comment section below. Don't forget to throw a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell if you hadn't. Keep listening to T3. We should be on multiple different audio podcast services now as well, so you can stay on top of the latest TrueNAS and tech topics, and we'll see you next week.